It's undeniable that change is happening in Cuba. Political, economic, and social forces are tugging both internally and externally at the Caribbean nation, a nation that has come to symbolize being stranded in the past. Any conversation about economic change in Cuba must include the U.S. embargo that has been in place since the early 1960s, despite increased international interest in Cuba and the loosening of U.S. restrictions whittling away at it. The Naples Daily News recently visited Cuba to take the pulse of its economy. We discovered some changes that have been occurring for years, such as the expansion of small business practices and international investment into the port of Maria. Other changes have happened nearly overnight, such as a surge in American visitors to Cuba after recent changes in travel restrictions. And in some cases, like the country's agricultural industry, change has not come enough despite the country's best efforts. Even under the weight of the embargo, tourism has always been a major driver of the fragile Cuban economy. Cuba is anxious to capitalize on American visitors.
The tourism industry in Cuba is very important for the development of our economy, not only for the results that it is able to reach in its own development, but also for the productive chains of development that it is able to generate in other segments of the economy.
She says there have been a significant increase in American visitors since U.S. President Barack Obama's December 2014 executive order relaxing travel restrictions for Americans.
Although without a doubt there is an interest that grows, a much more noticeable interest since the announcement of the conversations for the reestablishment of diplomatic relations between Cuba and the United States.
A huge symbol of the shift in the Cuban way of doing business is a rise of the entrepreneurs, known as cuantropropistas. The Cuban government has relaxed regulations of certain professions and has allowed these cuantropropistas to keep a portion of their profits. 40-year-old Yeni Figueroa runs a souvenir shop in Old Havana.
I decided to open this business to have a better life, improve my economic conditions because I am a single mother with a small child and I have a bit more flexibility with the child's schedules at school. And because this is self-employment, I have a little more means to care for my child.
The Port of Mariel and the adjacent Mariel Special Development Zone represents one of Cuba's most publicized bets to attract foreign investment and to build jobs that will help the country's struggling economy. The idea is to develop a vibrant port business that serves as a logistics center for the region and to attract multinational companies that can establish operations in Cuba, says Ana Teresa Igarza Martina, the project's general director.
We are seeing ourselves in a scenario where investors come here because they feel attracted, because they consider that Cuba is a country where they can settle in a steady way and build a future together.
That is the dream. However, Luis Alberto Acosta, a citizen of the neighboring town of Mariel, lives the reality. He said he's heard new factories have been approved for construction, and he knows many people have found jobs building the terminal's infrastructure. But he hasn't seen much improvement yet in his town.
You stand at night in the park downtown and you see the beautiful lights of the zone. But here in Mariel, I don't see it prospering. No, I don't see that this has prospered at all.
Since the 1959 Communist Revolution, small farms and cooperative farms, while increasing, have not been able to produce enough to feed Cubans. Despite its vast raw acreage, fertile lands, and a long tradition of agriculture, Cuba imports most of what its population eats. Carlos Yamil Gonzalez is a cattle farmer in the Pinar del Rio province of Cuba. Cuba lacks access to many things, including modern farming equipment, Gonzalez says, because of the U.S. embargo, or blockade as it is referred to in Cuba.
Había una coyuntura de, como decimos aquí, el bloqueo, como le dicen allá en Estados Unidos, el embargo.
There's a situation here called the blockade. They call it the embargo in the U.S. The country doesn't have access to technology, doesn't have access to resources. So all this affects all the economic life of Cuba. The economic life, the social life, and it affects the farmer as well. And that affects the cattle, and that affects all the crops.
The Cuban government and some U.S. businesses think farmers and consumers from both countries could benefit from improved economic relations. U.S. companies could sell the island tractors, fertilizers, pesticides, and other technology to help improve agricultural production, while Cuba could buy more American food at a lower cost. Cuba also could export crops like organic produce, tobacco, and fruits to profitable U.S. markets. For now, Gonzalez and his family work their state-owned allotment of land the only way they can, the old-fashioned way. Milking cows, clearing thick vegetation, and preparing crops are all done by hand. He can sometimes buy fertilizer, but he'd like the ability to buy feed for his cows, wire for his fences, and other conveniences to help him increase production. For Cuba, a country where change often comes slowly, there are opportunities for big change in the coming years. The country is at a crossroads, as some political and economic shifts open up new opportunities for both Cubans and Americans. Major differences still keep the countries divided, including the U.S. embargo.